different stories behind, but only one of them is usually seen. The person who walks away is often judged as the one who gave up, the one who stopped caring, or the one who lost. Yet beneath the surface, psychology reveals a far more complicated truth. The deepest consequences often fall on the person who believed the relationship would always survive another argument, another apology, another chance. Peace does not disappear in a single moment. It slips away quietly, replaced by memories that refuse to stay buried. The hardest battles are rarely fought during the relationship. They begin after the silence arrives. There comes a point when endless patience becomes emotional exhaustion, when explaining turns into acceptance, and when love slowly transforms into distance without anyone noticing. By the time someone finally chooses to leave, that decision has usually been growing inside them for weeks, months, or even years. It is not created by one mistake. It is built from countless small disappointments that slowly convince the heart that staying hurts more than leaving. What many people never expect is what happens next. The mind of the person left behind begins working in ways they cannot control. Forgotten conversations return. Ignored warnings become impossible to ignore. Small moments that once seemed unimportant suddenly carry enormous weight. The absence of one person starts changing the meaning of an entire past. This is where regret often begins, not because love suddenly appears, but because clarity finally does. In this video, you will discover why walking away creates such powerful psychological effects, why regret is often delayed instead of immediate, why silence can become louder than any argument, and why some people spend years searching for peace they cannot seem to find. You will also learn how attachment, emotional habits, memory, and human psychology work together to create consequences that many people never see coming. Along the way, we'll uncover lesser-known psychological patterns that explain why people often recognize true value only after it is gone, why the brain rewrites old memories after loss, and why healing changes the balance between two people more than anger ever could. This is not a story about revenge or making someone suffer. It is about understanding the hidden emotional processes that shape every meaningful relationship and why the greatest lessons often arrive after the ending. Stay with us until the very end because each part builds on the last, and the final insight may completely change the way you think about love, loss, regret, and emotional peace. Welcome to Shadow Wisdom, where we explore the hidden psychology behind human behavior, relationships, and personal growth. If you're ready to uncover truths that most people never notice, subscribe to the channel and join us for the journey ahead. The moment someone walks away is almost never the moment they decided to leave. That decision usually began long before anyone noticed it. It started quietly, hidden beneath normal conversations, forced smiles, and another promise that things would get better. Emotional exhaustion does not arrive like a storm. It arrives like water slowly wearing down a stone. At first, the person keeps believing the relationship can be saved. They explain how they feel. They ask for change. They forgive another mistake. They tell themselves that everyone has difficult seasons. They keep hoping that tomorrow will look different from yesterday. But every time their feelings are ignored, every time the same problem returns, and every time another promise is broken, a small piece of emotional energy disappears. Nothing dramatic happens in a single day. That is exactly why so many people fail to see it. The outside looks almost the same while the inside slowly changes. A person can laugh with you, eat dinner with you, answer your messages, and still be quietly grieving the relationship at the very same time. This silent grief is one of the least understood parts of human psychology. Many people believe grief only begins after someone leaves, but in reality it often begins while they are still there. They grieve the future they once imagined. They grieve the version of the relationship they hoped would exist. They grieve the feeling of being understood that slowly disappeared. Every disappointment becomes another reminder that the relationship is no longer giving them what it once did. Instead of feeling emotionally connected, they begin feeling emotionally alone, even while sitting beside the person they love. This loneliness is especially painful because it is invisible. Friends cannot always see it. Family may not notice it. Even the partner often mistakes silence for peace. But silence is not always a sign that everything is fine. Sometimes silence means the heart has become too tired to keep explaining. People often think relationships end because of one final argument, one cruel sentence, or one unforgettable mistake. Those moments may become the ending, but they are rarely the real cause. The real cause is usually hundreds of small moments that slowly pile up until carrying them becomes impossible. It is the forgotten conversations, the repeated disrespect, the emotional distance, the feeling that every effort is one-sided. One disappointment by itself is rarely enough to end a meaningful relationship. But when disappointment becomes a pattern, the mind begins protecting itself. It slowly lowers expectations. It stops expecting change. It stops believing every apology. Eventually, hope becomes harder to hold than letting go. By the time someone finally says goodbye, much of their emotional separation has already happened. Their body may still be present, but their heart has already started preparing for life without the relationship. This is why some people seem calm when they finally leave. Others mistake that calmness for coldness, but it is often the result of months or even years of emotional processing. They already cried the tears nobody saw. They already fought the internal battles nobody heard. They already spent countless nights wondering whether they should stay or leave. The final goodbye simply makes visible a decision that had been quietly growing inside them for a very long time. This hidden process creates another psychological effect that many people never recognize until it is too late. Human beings naturally adapt to whatever becomes familiar. Psychologists often describe this tendency as adaptation. The mind quickly adjusts to repeated experiences, even valuable ones. This is why people stop noticing the sound of a clock after sitting in a room for a while, or stop appreciating daily comforts they once dreamed about. The same process happens in relationships. When someone is always patient, always understanding, always willing to forgive, their kindness slowly starts feeling normal instead of special. Instead of appreciating their consistency, people begin expecting it. Forgiveness becomes assumed rather than valued. Loyalty becomes ordinary instead of extraordinary. Every time the patient person stays after another disappointment, the other person unconsciously learns a dangerous lesson. They begin believing that no matter what happens, this person will always remain. They confuse patience with permanence. They mistake unconditional effort for endless tolerance. Over time, this belief changes behavior. If someone thinks there will always be another chance, urgency disappears. They postpone important conversations. They delay change. They stop noticing the emotional needs of the other person because they believe there is always tomorrow. This creates complacency, not because they are intentionally cruel, but because the human brain often protects itself from constant awareness by turning repeated experiences into background noise. Appreciation fades when something feels guaranteed. This explains why people sometimes fail to recognize extraordinary love while they are receiving it. They become so familiar with it that they stop seeing it. The daily check-in, the comforting message, the thoughtful gesture, the quiet support after a difficult day. These small acts slowly become invisible because they happen so often. Ironically, the very consistency that once made the relationship strong begins making it easier to overlook. Then one day those gestures disappear. The morning message never arrives. The familiar voice becomes silent. The emotional support that once felt automatic is suddenly gone. Only then does the mind notice what had quietly been holding everything together. Absence creates awareness in ways presence often cannot. This is one of the greatest paradoxes of human relationships. We often notice what something meant only after it is no longer available. The silence after someone leaves becomes louder than every conversation that came before it. Every quiet room reminds the person of conversations they once ignored. Every ordinary routine now feels incomplete because the person who helped shape it is no longer there. As the days pass, another fascinating psychological process begins. The human memory is far less objective than most people believe. Memories are not stored like perfect recordings. Every time we remember something, the brain reconstructs it. It fills in details, changes emotional emphasis, and connects old experiences with present emotions. After a significant loss, this process becomes even stronger. During the relationship, arguments may have dominated attention. Daily frustrations may have seemed overwhelming. But once the relationship ends, painful memories often begin losing their emotional intensity. Meanwhile, positive memories become easier to access. The brain naturally searches for moments of warmth, laughter, comfort, and connection because they now represent something that no longer exists. This creates what psychologists call nostalgia bias. The past slowly begins looking better than it actually felt at the time. A simple conversation suddenly becomes precious. An ordinary walk becomes unforgettable. Shared meals, inside jokes, and quiet evenings gain emotional value they never seemed to have before. The brain starts comparing today's loneliness with yesterday's comfort, instead of comparing yesterday's conflicts with today's freedom. This comparison changes perspective. Suddenly the problems that once felt unbearable seem small compared to the emptiness that followed. This does not mean the relationship was perfect. It means loss changes the way the mind organizes memories. Distance softens certain emotions while strengthening others. Regret often grows inside this gap between memory and reality. People begin asking themselves whether they focused too much on imperfections and not enough on everything that was still good. Every remembered smile becomes another reminder of what can no longer be experienced. Every forgotten act of kindness returns with surprising clarity. Loss changes perspective because it removes certainty. What once felt guaranteed now exists only in memory. But memory is not the only thing changing. Identity begins changing too. Many people never realize how deeply another person became part of their emotional world until that person disappears. Relationships quietly shape everyday life in hundreds of invisible ways. A familiar message before work, a phone call after a stressful day, someone asking if you arrived home safely, someone celebrating your victories or calming your fears. These moments seem ordinary while they exist because they become part of daily routine. Yet routines create emotional stability. They give structure to the day and reassurance to the mind. When they suddenly disappear, life feels unfamiliar. Morning feels different. Evenings feel longer. Weekends lose their rhythm. Places once filled with comfort now feel strangely empty. This is not always because people miss the relationship itself. Often they miss the emotional safety the relationship quietly provided. They miss having one person who knew their habits, understood their silence, and made difficult days feel lighter simply by being there. Emotional dependence does not always mean unhealthy attachment. Sometimes it simply means another person's presence became woven into everyday life so naturally that their absence changes the entire emotional landscape. The person left behind may first believe they only miss companionship, but over time they discover they miss something even deeper. They miss feeling emotionally anchored. They miss knowing there was always someone to share good news with, someone who understood private jokes, someone whose presence made ordinary moments feel meaningful. Once that emotional foundation disappears, the world can suddenly feel less predictable. Familiar routines become painful reminders. Simple places carry unexpected memories. Even silence begins feeling different because it is no longer shared. This is the point where regret often becomes much deeper than sadness. It is no longer about losing a relationship. It becomes about realizing that a quiet source of emotional peace had been present all along, unnoticed until it was gone. One of the biggest misunderstandings about heartbreak is the belief that regret appears the moment a relationship ends. In reality, the human mind rarely works that way. Emotions do not always arrive on time. They often move at their own pace, especially after a major emotional change. In the beginning, many people experience something that seems completely unexpected. Instead of sadness, they feel relief. The tension is gone. The arguments have stopped. The difficult conversations no longer fill every day. There is more space to think, more time alone, and a temporary feeling of control. For a while, this relief can create the illusion that the relationship did not matter as much as it actually did. Friends may even hear them say they are doing fine. They throw themselves into work, spend more time with other people, start new hobbies, or distract themselves with endless activity. The human brain is remarkably good at protecting itself during the first stage of emotional pain. It often delays the full impact until the mind believes it is strong enough to face it. This delayed emotional processing is one reason so many people feel confident in the beginning and completely overwhelmed months later. Distraction is powerful, but it is temporary. Eventually, the busy days become ordinary. The excitement of new routines fades. The noise becomes quiet again. It is during these ordinary moments that reality begins replacing distraction. A familiar song suddenly brings back forgotten memories. A favorite restaurant feels strangely empty. A holiday arrives without the person who used to be there. Life slowly removes the distractions that once protected the heart, and the emotions that had been waiting quietly finally begin to surface. This is why regret often appears weeks or even months after the goodbye, instead of immediately. Acceptance takes time. The brain first has to understand that the separation is permanent before it fully allows the emotional weight to settle in. Until then, hope often remains hidden beneath the surface. Some people continue believing there will be another conversation, another chance, another opportunity to fix everything. As long as that possibility exists, true regret stays incomplete. But when the mind finally accepts that the relationship has truly ended, every missed opportunity begins returning with new meaning. Small moments that once seemed unimportant suddenly become unforgettable. Words left unsaid become heavier. Kindness that was overlooked becomes impossible to ignore. The person begins asking themselves questions they never considered before. Why didn't I listen more carefully? Why did I assume they would always stay? Why did I wait until they were gone to appreciate everything they gave? These questions are painful because they cannot change the past. They only reveal it more clearly. The emotional weight does not come from one memory. It comes from hundreds of memories connecting together into one larger realization. This is why delayed regret often feels stronger than immediate sadness. It grows gradually until avoiding it becomes impossible. Yet even regret is not the deepest emotional challenge that follows. There is another experience that can quietly consume the mind for much longer. After the first waves of regret begin settling in, many people find themselves searching for something they cannot easily find. They search for closure. Human beings naturally want stories to have endings that make sense. We want explanations. We want reasons. We want conversations that answer every question. But real life rarely offers perfect endings. Sometimes a person simply leaves. They do not create drama. They do not seek revenge. They do not continue arguing. They stop sending long emotional messages. They stop trying to prove their point. They quietly move forward. This peaceful departure often creates more psychological discomfort than an explosive ending ever could. During conflict, the mind stays focused on the argument itself, but silence removes that focus and replaces it with uncertainty. The brain dislikes uncertainty because unanswered questions leave emotional tasks unfinished. Instead of finding peace, the mind begins replaying endless possibilities. Why didn't they fight harder? Why didn't they try to convince me to stay? Why didn't they come back after everything we shared? Why do they seem calm? Why do they look like they are moving forward while I still feel trapped in the past? These questions circle through the mind repeatedly because there is no clear answer waiting at the end. The unknown becomes emotionally exhausting. Every day without contact creates another opportunity for the imagination to fill the empty spaces. The brain starts creating explanations, many of which are far more painful than reality itself. Some begin believing they were never loved. Others convince themselves they were easily replaced. Some wonder whether the relationship meant anything at all. Yet the silence often has nothing to do with a lack of love. Sometimes silence simply means the other person finished grieving before they physically left. Sometimes it means they chose peace instead of another cycle of conflict. Sometimes it means they accepted that another conversation would not create a different outcome. Unfortunately, the person left behind rarely sees this hidden process. They only experience the silence itself. Ironically, arguments often provide more emotional relief than silence because arguments still create connection. Silence removes even that. It leaves the mind alone with its own thoughts. This is why silence creates questions that arguments never could. Every unanswered question becomes another emotional weight carried into tomorrow. While one person searches desperately for explanations, the other may already be building a completely different future. Healing creates changes that many people never expect. At first, the person who walked away may appear broken. They may struggle with loneliness, uncertainty, or fear. But healing is not always dramatic. It happens through small daily decisions that slowly reshape identity. They begin sleeping without waiting for difficult conversations. They start making choices without asking for constant approval. They reconnect with hobbies they had forgotten. They spend time with supportive people who remind them of their value. They begin noticing how peaceful life can feel when they are no longer constantly trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Slowly, emotional independence replaces emotional survival. Confidence grows, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because they discover they can survive what once seemed impossible. Their boundaries become stronger. They stop accepting treatment they once tolerated. They become more careful about who receives their time, energy, and trust. Self-worth quietly improves because it is no longer based on another person's approval. This change surprises many people who expected them to remain emotionally dependent forever. The person who once chased conversations now protects their peace. The person who constantly explained themselves now feels comfortable with silence. The person who feared being alone discovers strength they never knew existed. One of the greatest psychological shifts happens when someone no longer needs external validation to feel valuable. Instead of asking whether others appreciate them, they begin appreciating themselves. This confidence is often misunderstood as coldness, but it usually comes from healing rather than bitterness. They simply stop seeking permission to exist peacefully. Meanwhile, the person who stayed behind often notices these changes much later. They expected sadness, they expected waiting, they expected another chance. Instead, they see someone who has grown beyond the version they once knew. This unexpected growth creates a powerful emotional contrast. The person who left is becoming stronger while the person left behind is still trying to understand what happened. Personal growth often becomes visible long after the relationship ends, and that visibility changes everything. It forces people to confront the reality that time did not stand still. Life continued moving forward. The opportunity they once believed would always exist quietly disappeared. This is often the moment when the deepest realization finally begins. Most people spend a great deal of time searching for external reasons behind their pain. They blame timing, stress, distance, other people, bad luck. While these factors can certainly influence relationships, lasting peace rarely comes from finding someone else to blame. Blame may protect the ego for a short time, but it also delays healing. As long as every problem belongs to someone else, there is nothing meaningful to learn. Real emotional growth begins when a person develops the courage to examine their own behavior honestly. This does not mean accepting responsibility for everything that happened. Healthy accountability is not the same as unhealthy self-blame. It simply means asking difficult questions with honesty instead of defensiveness. Did I truly listen when they tried to explain their feelings? Did I become too comfortable because I believed they would never leave? Did I appreciate their efforts while they were still beside me? Did I mistake forgiveness for endless acceptance? These questions are uncomfortable because they challenge the story we often tell ourselves, yet they also open the door to lasting change. Acceptance slowly replaces denial. Learning begins replacing guilt. Instead of endlessly replaying mistakes, the person begins understanding why those mistakes happened. This understanding creates wisdom that future relationships can benefit from. Without accountability, people often repeat the same patterns with different partners, believing every failure was caused by someone else. But when responsibility is accepted with honesty and balance, old patterns begin losing their power. Emotional maturity grows through reflection, not avoidance. True peace does not come from convincing someone to return. It does not come from winning an argument months later or proving who was right. Real peace comes from becoming the kind of person who would no longer repeat the same mistakes if life offered another opportunity. That transformation cannot be forced by another relationship. It begins quietly, one honest realization at a time, and it changes far more than a single ending ever could. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. People rarely walk away because of one bad day or one final argument. They walk away after carrying emotional weight for far longer than anyone realizes. Long before the goodbye is spoken, part of their heart has already begun letting go. That is why patience should never be mistaken for permanence. Someone can forgive you many times, but every unhealed disappointment quietly changes the way they feel. By the time they finally leave, they are often choosing peace over pain, not because they stopped caring, but because they cared for too long without seeing real change. Then comes the silence, and silence has a way of revealing truths that noise never could. Memories begin changing. The moments that once seemed ordinary suddenly become priceless. Regret arrives, not because time moves slowly, but because acceptance does. Healing also changes everything. The person who once searched for love outside themselves slowly learns to find strength within. Their confidence grows, their boundaries become stronger, and their life begins moving in a new direction. Meanwhile, the person left behind is faced with the hardest lesson of all. Lasting peace never comes from blaming someone else or wishing the past could be rewritten. It comes from taking responsibility, learning from mistakes, and becoming someone who will never repeat the same patterns again. That is where real transformation begins. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden inside every goodbye is this. Love is not tested when everything is easy. It is tested in the small moments that seem too ordinary to matter. A kind word, a sincere apology, a little more patience, a little more appreciation. These quiet moments shape the future far more than dramatic gestures ever will. The saddest endings are often the ones that could have been prevented by noticing the value of someone before they became a memory. Sometimes the loudest goodbye is never spoken out loud. It is the moment someone silently decides they can no longer carry the relationship alone. From that moment, everything begins to change. Yet every ending also carries a lesson. Every loss offers an opportunity to grow wiser.